Welcome to TEP Talks, episode 4. TEP Talks is a new service provided by the TEP Foundation, Inc. TEP Foundation, Inc. is the 88-year-old charitable arm of Tau Epsilon Phi Fraternity. TEP Foundation is a nonprofit New York State registered 501c3 whose mission statement it is to provide scholarship, award, and education to our valued undergraduate and alumni brotherhood. TEP Talks are used as a platform to educate, promote, and explore the accomplishments of Tau Epsilon Phi fraternity's most distinguished alumni. That said, our fourth guest is Brother Jeff Altman. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Now, you said this is TEP Talks, right?
Yes, sir. You're on TEP Talks.
Oh, darn. I thought this was TED Talks. I thought it was a TED interview. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. It's the next best thing.
I'm joking.
It's okay. It's the next best thing.
Yes, it is.
So where I wanted to start with you is, as a distinguished alumni, I wanted to learn more about your background and where you grew up and what did you study?
Well, I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I had I would say, a pretty average childhood. Had friends, had a wonderful mother and father. I was an only child, and went to high school there. And in high school, I studied, what would be college preparatory material. And then I got out of high school, Nottingham High School in Syracuse, New York, and was accepted at Johns Hopkins University because I paid a guy off. No, I'm kidding. And at Johns Hopkins, there were area majors, and one of the area majors that I was in was called Social and Behavioral Sciences, which meant that I could take just about anything, any course I wanted, as long as I got 120 credits.
And what year did you start? When was that? Can you remember?
1927.
I think it was a little later than that, but
it felt like 1927. It was 1969 that I matriculated or got into Johns Hopkins. And then let's see, what happened after that was, 4 years, and I graduated a little late. I graduated technically in 74, but I was really in the class of 73.
And when did you join TEP, and what was the chapter designation?
I think the chapter designation was the Phi Eta Chapter at Johns Hopkins, and I was there pledging in 1960, late 1969, early 1970.
And thinking back about joining TEP, can you think of anything that stood out about the chapter, or what was the inspiration for you to want to become a part of Tau Epsilon Phi, and let's say as opposed to another fraternity or other fraternities at the time on the campus?
Well, I found that the TEP had a variety of people. There wasn't just one kind. It wasn't a jock house. It wasn't a religion-based house. It wasn't a there was no basis for joining TEP, except the fact that you appreciated the fraternity and the people that were in it. And I think that's what drew me, the people that were in it, especially the guy that became president of the fraternity. At the same time I was pledging, he was running for president. He was my best friend in college, and another sort of best friend and I, as freshmen, were rushed and decided we would pledge TEP. And he was my friend in the dormitories, who was my closest friend. But my best friend in college really became a TEP member. And then in the later 2 years of TEP, the guy I roomed with was also a Tau Epsilon Phi man. And we always enjoyed being around the fraternity and having fun.
So you felt very comfortable and close with the chancellor at the time, in addition to your roommates, right?
Oh, no question. Yes, absolutely. My roommates influenced me, and two of my roommates influenced me. And as I say, the guy that was becoming chancellor of the TEP house became my best friend.
And back then, do you have any memories, things that stood out to you at your time when you were a member of the chapter? It could be funny, could be anything in between. Do you have any fond memories of
being my gosh. Well, as we'll talk a little maybe later in this podcast, about some of my extracurricular activities. I was very involved in magic, close-up sleight-of-hand magic, and some of the greatest performers in the country actually came over to the TEP house and would perform for some of the guys there. And so those were fond memories. I had fond memories of some of the crazy things that I did as a TEP. I remember needing money and betting guys that I wouldn't run up to Charles Street, which was the main street in Baltimore, naked.
Wow.
And come back and get
naked.
And come back and get in my car and drive around the block completely without any clothing. And I think for that I got about $9.
Wow.
Hooked up.
Then again, I guess in the late 60s, that was the thing to do, right? That was
the
hippie movement.
Not exactly what I did that night.
Okay. So transitioning from your experience in the fraternity, how was your experience as an actor? And can you talk a little more about any roles that you had, highlight significant roles as an actor, and then possibly what some struggles could have been during your acting career?
Absolutely. Well, I started, I drove out to California in 1974 after I graduated from college, and got hooked up with a place out there called the Magic Castle. And that's where I thought I was going to park my career doing magic for a living. And then one night I got up at a place that probably people have heard of called the Comedy Store, which was became a very famous club in Hollywood and still is to this day, very famous. Produced a lot of stars back in the 70s. And I just have very fond memories of that whole time. There were struggles. I remember in 1980, I was fortunate enough to get my own show on television, which was called Pink Lady and Jeff, two Japanese girls who would come over to the States, who were very famous in Japan, and myself. And we had a variety show on NBC.
Wow.
And it lasted 5 weeks and was regarded by Time magazine as one of the 35 worst shows ever.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So that was a struggle. And I always struggled a little bit with my own sense of personality. I was I was easy to get excited. And sometimes that would help me and sometimes it wouldn't. But I remember being on a show in the 90s called Nurses, in which I played the male nurse. And one day I got a piece of script that was sent over to the stage. I took a look at it and I said, "This is just a piece of crap. Send this back to the writers."
Right.
Well, I wasn't on the show the next year. So that was a struggle, and getting away from the club situation. I was one of the guys in the 1980s that helped start all the comedy clubs in the country. Because before the Comedy Store and the Improv and a couple of other clubs in New York, there were no places to perform stand-up comedy unless you were an opening act, which I did, and unless you were famous, which I wasn't. And so I had a lot of very, very interesting situations that some worked out well, some didn't, but I enjoyed the idea of being in show business.
Was Pauly Shore's mother the owner of the Comedy Store?
That's exactly right, Jason. Pauly Shore's mother was Mitzi Shore, and she had 4 kids, all of whom I knew, and one of them was Pauly.
That's awesome. And did you ever meet the father? I think he started the whole thing, right?
He started the club in 1972. He and another fellow, his name was Sammy Shore, and he and another fellow started the Comedy Store in 72. And then, as I say, I came out 2 years later. It was practically brand new. And so I was one of the first guys to kind of be a regular at the Comedy Store.
Wow. And I guess I'll just explain for the younger guys. So Pauly Shore was a very famous actor and comedian in the 90s. He was a household name. And that is who Pauly Shore's mother owned the club in which you performed at. I'm just trying to clarify. Sure. We have some young guys that say, "Who is that?"
Some guys are looking at me right now going, "Who is that?"
Well, the fact that you're here is going to explain this to everybody. So you were also on the Dukes of Hazzard, correct?
Yes, I would say that was one of the nicest and best situations I ever had in show business. I played Hughie Hogg, Boss Hogg's nephew, and that was back in the late 70s, early 80s, middle 80s. And every season I would come on and do a show where I was the guest star, and they would put a show kind of around my character.
And so moving forward from the acting, so you've done a lot of on-camera work. What do you do now? What is your professional career now?
Well, earlier today I was out hitchhiking.
Somehow you found it home to be on this podcast.
Yeah, that's correct. And repeat that question again, Jason.
Sure. So the question I want everybody to know is what you do now. So you're coming off of being on TV. You were Hughie Hogg. You were involved in a show with two Japanese women. You've had a lot of on-camera roles. And
yes.
The question is, what do you do now? What is your professional career?
Well, in 2019, I retired from what would be considered Hollywood show business and moved out of the Hollywood environs and moved to North Carolina, where I live now. And so I think that what I moved into was kind of, I backed up in my career.
Right.
And I went back to what I knew when I was in college and stuff, which was magic.
Mm-hmm.
And to be more specific, close-up sleight of hand magic with cards and coins and things that you can do right in front of a person. And I'm sorry.
No, you first. Finish.
My father was one of the best card men and coin men in the country.
Mm-hmm.
He handled coins and cards just beautifully, and he was known by almost every magician in the United States. And he was popular back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and early 70s. And then he retired from doing magic. Well, that wasn't his primary occupation. He did something else for a living, but he could have been a famous celebrity in show business, in my estimation. He was that good.
Wow.
So I got in 2019. I retired from the stage, did my last show in Las Vegas. And then I decided I'm going to get back into a close-up sleight of hand, and that's kind of what I do now. And I go out and perform at corporate events, and I just performed for a doctor's office. 18 women were in the room. And I got to entertain them. And so really a pack of cards and a group of people together is all I need to do some entertaining.
And where were you performing in Vegas? I'm curious.
Well, I performed actually at a place called the Comic Strip,
Mm-hmm.
or not the Comic Strip. It's a club in the Tropicana Hotel called the name of the club is the Comedy. Help me out, Jason.
Well, it's not the Comedy Store.
No, it's not the Comedy Store. Although I performed in Las Vegas at the Comedy Store when they had venues there. But anyway, I had a venue there that I performed in Las Vegas, and I can't believe I can't think of the name of this place. It's like the biggest comedy club in the country. That and the Comedy Store.
That's not a problem. So, can you tell us more about being a sleight of hand magician and what you enjoy the most about that experience?
Well, it's rewarding in that you're the sole performer, so it's not very different than being on stage doing stand-up comedy, and which I did for 35 years, and really almost 40 years. And I find that the incentive is the same, the gratification is the same. It's just like before, but instead of performing with just your mouth and the words, you now have a deck of cards in your hand, and you can do all sorts of things. And I was influenced by a lot of people who were very famous. People listening probably know the name of Ricky Jay. And Ricky Jay and I were very close friends, and he inspired me to actually, one of the people that inspired me to get into show business, 50 years ago.
And how did your TEP experience lead to your success, both in your acting career and now in your newfound success as a close-up sleight hand magician?
Well, I at the TEP house almost every night. I was in there in one of the rooms doing magic for people, doing close-up sleight of hand. And as I say, the guy who was my best friend while I was in college also did card magic and close-up sleight of hand. So we would spend hours together just talking about really a pack of playing cards. And I learned a lot of things in TEP. I learned honesty. I started learning how to perform when I was in TEP. I was a drummer. I played the drums, and I invited Buddy Rich to come down to Johns Hopkins and play a clinic with me. Buddy Rich, arguably the greatest drummer who ever lived. And I was in TEP when that happened, and all the TEP brothers were there to see me, and the camaraderie that was there, and the basis for my performing, I think, started actually at that TEP house in Baltimore, Maryland, 50 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And so moving forward, also with your professional career, being a sleight of hand magician and being an actor, could you talk a little bit about your connections that you've made, and if there are any famous people that somehow you've met along the way?
Well, let's see. I wouldn't call myself famous. I was much better known in the 70s and 80s and 90s. People have forgotten me a little bit now because I haven't been in front of the camera in the last 10 or 15 years as much. But it has afforded me the opportunity to be exposed to some people that heretofore would not have been exposed to. Muhammad Ali was one. Jerry Seinfeld, David Letterman, Jay Leno. I spoke to Jay the other night on the phone to see how he was doing. He was burned badly. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes,
yeah. So we had a conversation the other night, and that was nice. But I guess my best friend from show business, aside from a person who has passed away, would be David Letterman. He's one of my closest friends, and I guess I did his show something like 45 times.
Wow, that's incredible.
And just a great guy. A really kind of what you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. He's not very different from the way he is on camera to the way he is off camera.
And can you tell us what that was like being on the show, what that feeling was to be in front of a camera for a live audience of millions of people?
Nerve-wracking. It really disturbed the old neurons. And you get very, very anxious before you'd go on the show, and you'd have to go over your material with someone.
Right.
You'd have to make sure everything was exactly right. And I didn't used to perform much stand up on the show. I would do it from a seated position on the panel.
Right.
And so I'd have to come up with a lot of things that were, that sounded plausible as just conversation and be funny.
Right.
And I thought I was pretty good at that, actually. I thought that
I think you were better than, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you're better than good. I saw the clip of it. I mean, anybody that watches that, they would have thought you're natural. I don't think there was anything there that indicated you weren't.
Well, thank you for saying that, Jason. I appreciate it. But the nerves were the thing. When you did the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or Jay Leno or whoever was on, or David's show on the Letterman show, there was a great deal of nervousness, a great feeling of expectation of wanting to do well and to make the people laugh. And on one of the last shows I did with Dave, I actually did a card trick. And it was one of the best shows I think I ever did. It showed the camaraderie between the two of us, and it also showed me being able to at least find a card.
And how would you say Tau Epsilon Phi has impacted, contributed, or influenced your life overall?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I was taking a subject called, I think, American Political Thought with a professor named Godfrey Dietze, who was a sort of an arch conservative who threatened once that if there were all the Vietnam marches that went on during the time I was in college, he threatened to put up a cobalt belt around Washington.
Wow.
So that no one could get in. But anyway, I was taking one of his classes, and I took a test, and I didn't do very well on the test. And afterwards, I went up and told him kind of Well, it was an out and out lie. I said my father had been sick and I was worried about my father, and I had gone back up to Syracuse to visit him, and it was all just kind of BS.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, I went back and I told a couple of the guys in the fraternity what I had done, and they just kind of looked like, "Oh, geez." Woo. You know what I did? I got up back on my haunches and went back and nailed that professor down and told him that I had essentially lied to him and that it wasn't true and that my father and I was just trying to do better on the test.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Well, that's very honest, Mr. Altman, but I'm still going to have to grade you down." And I think I passed the course, but I was not an exceptional student that day.
Mm.
But I think honesty was the thing I took away from TEP. Of all things, that situation influenced me a great deal in my life.
Well, our fraternity, as you know, is founded on 3 pillars: friendship,
Right.
chivalry, and service. And I would say honesty falls under the chivalry pillar.
Yes, I would agree with that. And in addition to that, Jason, I would say camaraderie, learning how to live with other people, learning how to be in the same room with another person, and living. When I lived in the fraternity house sophomore year, I was with one of those best friends I talked about from residential living, freshman residential living,
Mm-hmm.
and we got along okay, and it was a square deal. And you learn how to live with a house full of guys.
So I was going to say that. So you lived in the chapter house, correct?
I did.
Okay.
1 year, my sophomore year.
And did you see a contrast between living in the house, your experience of being in the house and not living in the house? Was there a difference to you?
Yes, there wasn't the constant camaraderie. There wasn't the constant,
Right.
Seeing guys that you liked and knew, or were, in my case, mostly more talented than me.
Right.
In terms of certainly academics. And so to butt heads up with guys that were real smart and real knowledgeable was a treat. So I took that away from my TEP experience, and as well as the honesty situation, which I mentioned.
And so as we wrap up, before we get to our final question, can you tell everybody who's watching how they can find you? And can you give a pitch to your website about your sleight-of-hand magic?
Absolutely. To find me, all you got to do is just Google Jeff Altman. But if you want to go to my website, it's jeffaltmanmagic.com. And you can see some stuff on there. Because of COVID, I haven't had a lot of stuff listed that I've done. I'm just starting to get back into the groove now as people are starting to free up their offices, their corporate events, etc. But Jeff Altman Magic, or just Google Jeff Altman, and you'll find me more than you'd like, probably.
So as a distinguished alumni of TEP, as we wrap this up, can you tell me what your message is to our brotherhood?
Well, I think what I garnered out of my experience was I was emboldened by the thought of bigger things for me. My father wanted me to be a doctor. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, I think, or a lawyer or something with a heading attached to it, with a nice resume and all that stuff. And I wanted to go out to Hollywood. So my sophomore or junior year, I finally got the courage up. My mother sent me $200. I got a plane ticket, and I visited the Magic Castle in Hollywood junior year.
Wow.
And then senior year, I even got to perform at the Magic Castle when I was too young to even be in the club.
Okay.
So I would say what TEP did, and what I would suggest others do who are in the fraternity or who remember the fraternity. I hope this was maybe will affect them. Pardon me?
Inspirational.
Yes, the inspiration was to follow your dream. And if your dream is to go out to Hollywood and get into show business, take a shot at it. If your dream is to get into medical school, take a shot at it. If your dream is to go to law school, do that. If your dream is to just go out in the world and help other people, well, bless your heart, go do that.
That's a very powerful message to wrap up the podcast. Brother Jeff Altman, I want to thank you so much for participating. You have an amazing story. You have an amazing career. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with the sleight of hand magic. We have to follow up possibly and do another one and see where you're at. But with that being said, I did, and it was a very honor and pleasure to have you on the show. So if you are or know of any alumni who'd like to participate on the podcast, please have them send an email to president@tepfoundation.org. We want to highlight your accomplishments both within and outside of Tau Epsilon Phi. You can also find more information about the TEP Foundation, Inc. by going on the web to www.tep.org/foundation. You may also find us on social media by subscribing to and liking our YouTube channel, following us on Instagram, and or adding our Facebook page. Again, we had Brother Jeff Altman. Thank you so much.